In just 19 seconds, Jasmine Crockett turned a quiet Capitol hearing into a political earthquake as Jim Jordan looked on in shock. With her voice shaking from fury, she held up a stack of documents that could link Donald Trump's inner circle to the suppression of over 2.4 million minority votes. Cameras flashed, lawmakers froze, and the nation's pulse spiked. For the first time in decades, America watched a congresswoman risk her career and her safety to speak the unfiltered truth. But what happened in that moment that left Jordan without a single word to say? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol wasn't supposed to be this quiet, not at this hour. Not with a storm clawing at the windows and the country watching on every TV screen in America. Breaking news flared across the bottom of the feed. Trump's legal team moves to block release of voter suppression documents. The anchor's voice was sharp. If the motion passes, the evidence will be sealed for decades. And millions of votes will vanish without a trace. In her district office, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She stood in the flicker of the television, jaw tight, the rain's relentless drumming matching the rhythm in her chest. Then the phone rang, once, sharp, and she snatched it up before the second ring. They're burying it tonight, the voice hissed, heavy with static. Marcus Ellery, Capitol insider, not a man given to panic, until now. You have hours, Jasmine, hours, after midnight. It's gone. And the line went dead. Her eyes darted back to the TV. Trump's lead attorney, that smug smirk plastered on his face, pushed through a crush of cameras into the federal courthouse. He didn't answer a single question. He didn't need to. In his mind, the verdict was already signed. The network cut to the evidence at stake. Maps of Georgia, Texas, Wisconsin, 12 counties, home to more than 3.2 million residents, outlined in jagged red, every one of them majority black or Latino. Entire neighborhoods erased from political power with the stroke of a pen. She could hear their voices in her head. The elderly veteran turned away at the polls, the grandmother in tears because her ballot never arrived. The college student told his address no longer matched the rolls. These weren't numbers, they were lives. And someone was about to lock them away forever. Lightning lit the room white for half a second, burning Trump's image into the glass of the screen. She saw her own reflection layered over his, a collision waiting to happen. Her breath came slow, measured, but her hands curled into fists. This wasn't politics anymore, this was theft in daylight, sanctioned in marble halls. She reached for her leather coat, the one still faintly smelling of tear gas from protests past, and paused at the door. She knew exactly what moving forward meant: political suicide, relentless attacks, maybe worse. But she also knew one thing more dangerous than speaking out was staying silent. If you knew the truth could take down a president, would you risk everything to say it out loud? Jasmine's hand hovered over the doorknob, but her mind was already somewhere else, a dimly lit VFW hall in rural Georgia, a year ago, where she'd met Sergeant Harold Boone, 83 years old, chest still broad from his army days, dress shirt pressed as if for inspection. He'd come to vote in the midterms wearing his service medals, the same way he had for decades. But that day, the poll worker glanced at his ID and shook her head. "You're not in the system." He thought it was a mistake. He pulled out his voter registration card, the same one he'd used 2 years before. She told him it didn't matter. New law, new rules, no explanation, no recourse. He'd driven 3 hours, in uniform, to cast his ballot. And he'd been sent home like a stranger in his own country. Jasmine had listened to him tell the story, eyes shining with the humiliation he tried to hide. He'd survived Vietnam, but this cut deeper. "I fought for this flag," he said, voice trembling, "but they decided my voice didn't count." She'd promised him then and there that she'd fight for his. That vow had never left her. Now, with the rain still hammering against her office window, every story she'd ever heard from constituents surged back. The young mother whose polling place was moved 20 miles away without notice. The college kid turned away because his student ID no longer met requirements. The elderly woman who had to stand for hours in the cold only to be told her name was missing. One by one, these weren't coincidences. They were deliberate moves on a chessboard designed to keep certain Americans out of the game. And she knew exactly whose fingerprints were on that board. Her pulse quickened as she remembered the hearings, the times she'd gone toe-to-toe with Trump's loyalists. She'd faced Jin Jordan's smirking interruptions, Marjorie Taylor Greene's name-calling, and every slick insult Mitch McConnell's camp could throw at her. She'd cut through them with facts, sharp as glass, and a tongue trained to leave bruises. The press called her confrontations volatile. She called them necessary. Every skirmish had been a rehearsal for this moment. She let the thought settle. This wasn't just about stopping one motion in one courtroom. This was about dismantling an entire machine, one that could erase millions of voices with the click of a pen. She could already feel the weight of the fight pressing down on her chest. Somewhere deep inside, fear stirred, but alongside it, something heavier, hotter. A defiance she couldn't quiet if she tried. She gripped the doorknob, steel in her eyes. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she was about to walk into. The game wasn't over. It hadn't even started. And tonight, she was done playing defense. The cafe was almost empty, the kind of place where the light is more shadow than glow and the air smells faintly of burnt espresso and secrets. Jasmine slid into the booth, her leather coat damp from the storm. Across from her sat three of the only people she trusted. Marcus Ellery, the Hill insider who'd made the call. Claire Vasquez, a civil rights attorney with eyes that missed nothing. And Tom Braddock, a retired journalist whose Rolodex was a graveyard of fallen politicians. Their faces told her everything before they spoke. "They're not going to fight you in the open," Claire began, voice low. "They'll go after your credibility first, drag every case you've ever worked through the mud. Every statement, every misstep, blown up on cable news." Marcus leaned in, whispering like the walls could listen. "And that's if they keep it political. I've seen what happens when Trump's people decide you're a threat. Cars outside your house at night. Anonymous tips to the FBI. Smear blogs dropping your family's address online." Tom's tone was blunt, almost surgical. "This isn't about one hearing. If you step into that room with those documents, you're not just a target, you're a headline they'll run until you're unrecognizable. You could lose your seat, your safety. Hell, your life." His eyes searched hers for hesitation, but there was none. Jasmine didn't look away. "If they want a fight, I'll bring the fight to them. In front of the whole damn country." The words weren't loud, but they landed like a hammer. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain outside tapped harder against the windows, as if echoing her resolve. Marcus broke the silence. "You're holding evidence that could burn his entire network to the ground." But Jasmine. It might not just burn him. He reached into his briefcase and slid a thin manila envelope across the table. "You need to know what's in here before you decide." She hesitated, the flap already torn halfway. A flash of unease passed through her as she caught Claire's expression. A subtle shake of the head, a silent warning. Jasmine's fingers paused on the edge of the envelope. Her heart was steady now, almost unnervingly so. She knew once she looked, there would be no unseeing it, no walking it back. And she realized in that instant that the risk wasn't only about what Trump had done. It was about the thin, dangerous line between exposing a lie and detonating her own future. She let the envelope rest untouched on the table, the rain outside shifting to a hard, steady downpour. Somewhere deep inside, the question had already taken root, growing sharp and unavoidable. What if the truth I unleash doesn't just end him, but takes me down with it? The black SUV rolled to a stop just outside the Capitol's east front. Even with the tinted windows, Jasmine could see the flashing lights bouncing off the wet pavement, the blur of cameras jockeying for position. The door opened, and the nose hit her like a wave. The sharp pop of camera shutters, the bark of reporters, and, underneath it all, the guttural chant of Trump's loyalists gathered behind barricades. Their signs screamed in block letters, "Stop the witch hunt, Crockett lies, Trump 2024. One woman's voice cut through the chaos, high and jagged. "Traitor." Security moved in tighter. She stepped out, the storm cooled air slicing against her skin. The Capitol loomed above, its white dome lit like a beacon, or a warning. She straightened her coat, each step deliberate, heels clicking in a steady, defiant rhythm. "Do you think you can win against Trump's machine?" A young reporter leaned over the rope line, microphone trembling. She didn't break stride. "Truth doesn't need a machine," she said, eyes locked ahead. "Just a microphone." The reply hit the air like a gavel. As she climbed the steps, the chants grew louder. One protester broke past the barricade before officers caught him. She didn't turn her head. She knew they were watching for a flinch. Inside the security checkpoint, metal detectors hummed and scanners beeped. An aide rushed up, whispering fast, "Jordan's already in the chamber. He's been talking to the press for 20 minutes. He says you're here for a political stunt." Jasmine allowed herself the faintest smile. "Then he's already nervous." She moved through the last set of double doors, the air inside warmer, heavier with anticipation. In the rotunda, the marble floor gleamed under the dome skylight, reflecting the restless movements of staffers, journalists, and armed security. Somewhere beyond the next hallway, the hearing room waited, and with it, the man whose smug interruptions she'd swatted down more times than she could count. Her pulse slowed, not from calm but from focus. She was walking into an arena built to test how much truth a person could speak before the walls closed in. And in that instant, she knew exactly why they feared her, not because she might lose, but because she might win loud enough for the whole country to hear. The hearing room was a pressure chamber disguised in oak-and velvet. Rows of microphones sat like dormant weapons, waiting to be switched on. The overhead lights were too bright, bleaching every face to its most unforgiving truth. In the far corner, Republican committee members leaned in close to Jim Jordan, their voices low but their eyes darting toward the door. Jordan sat back in his chair, one leg crossed, the tip of his pen tapping against a yellow legal pad in a steady, impatient rhythm. It was the look of a man rehearsing his attack lines, already imagining the headlines. Trump's legal counsel stood just behind them. Tailored suits, crisp cuffs, faces carved into stone. One of them handed Jordan a folded note. He opened it, smirked, and slid it into his jacket pocket without breaking eye contact with the door where Jasmine Crockett would enter. Camera flashes popped intermittently as photographers tested their shots, the white burst slicing through the low murmur of the room. Somewhere in that blur of clicking lenses and shuffling papers, Jasmine spotted a face she knew, and wished she didn't. Alan Pierce, once a trusted strategist on her own campaign, now in a navy tie and Trump lapel pin, leaning down to whisper into the ear of one of Jordan's aides. When his eyes met hers, there was no apology there, no regret, just the flat, transactional stare of someone who'd already chosen his side and sold the rest. The betrayal lodged in her chest like a shard of glass. She forced her gaze away, scanning the committee table. On one end, a member scrolled deliberately through Twitter, as if the hearing were already a sideshow. Another was leafing through a binder thick with tabbed sections, background checks, social media screenshots, old speeches. They were cataloging her, piece by piece, deciding which wound to press first. From the gallery, the press corps leaned forward, ready to pounce. Every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance, was another breadcrumb for them to spin into a narrative before she even spoke. The air had the electric smell of an oncoming storm, heavy with things about to be said and things carefully meant not to be. At the head of the table, the committee chair tapped the gavel once, not to start the hearing, but to remind the room who controlled the tempo. Jasmine watched Jordan's mouth curl into the faintest smile as he leaned toward the mic, his lips barely moving, a muttered remark meant only for the members closest to him. Whatever it was, it made the aide beside him choke back a laugh. She exhaled once, slow and deliberate. If this was the battlefield they'd prepared for her, they had forgotten one thing. She'd come armed with more than paper. And by the time she was finished, it wouldn't be her scrambling to hold the floor, it would be them. The chair's gavel cracked once, and Jasmine began. Her voice was steady, pitched to carry over the soft hum of the cameras and restless shuffling in the gallery. For years, we've been told that the integrity of our elections is sacred. But what happens when the very people entrusted to protect it? She didn't get further. Jordan leaned forward, microphone hot, his voice slicing through hers like a wire. "Madam Chair, point of order, this is nothing more than grandstanding for the cameras." His tone dripped with practiced disdain, each syllable sharpened to provoke. A few committee members smirked, as if they'd been waiting for this cue. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly toward him, the pause deliberate, dangerous. "Grandstanding," she said, voice low but cutting. "I'm not here to grandstand. I'm here to stop you from turning democracy into a circus where the ringmaster is a felon." The room detonated, gasps from one side, applause from the other, boos raining down from the back rows. Security stepped in along the walls as the noise swelled. The chair's gavel slammed 3 times, demanding order, but the moment was already everywhere, Hashtags flashing across Twitter, live stream chats exploding, cable news chirons being rewritten in real time. Crockett torches Jordan, Capitol hearing erupts. Jordan's face reddened, jaw tightening as he adjusted his mic. Careful with your words, Congresswoman. This isn't a street corner protest. She leaned forward just enough for her voice to cut through the renewed murmur. No, Congressman, this is the people's house. And I'm here because their voices have been stolen while you played stagehand for the thief. Somewhere behind her, a phone camera clicked, a single shot, perfectly timed, destined to loop on every platform by nightfall. She could feel the heat of the spotlight now, not just from the overheads, but from every lens, every live feed. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a duel, and the country was watching every strike. Then, a shadow at her side. One of her aides stepped forward, his face pale, eyes locked on hers. Without a word, he slid a folded note across the desk, fingers lingering on it for a heartbeat too long. She covered it with her hand, the paper warm from his touch. She didn't open it right away. She finished her sentence, let it hang in the air like the last echo of a gunshot, then eased the paper open under the table. For words, written in quick, urgent strokes, they know about the whistleblower. Her pulse spiked. She folded the paper once, then again, tucking it into her palm. Jordan was still talking, but she wasn't hearing him anymore. All she could think was that the battlefield had just shifted, and somewhere in this very room, the enemy was already one step ahead. The note burned in her hand for the rest of the hearing, its weight heavier than the gavel, heavier than Jordan's voice trying to drown her out. By nightfall, the Capitol had emptied. The reporters had moved on, but the warning still echoed in her head. At 11:47 p.m., Jasmine stepped out of the driver's seat of a borrowed sedan into the dim underbelly of an underground parking garage 3 blocks from Union Station. The air was damp, metallic, carrying the hollow drip of water somewhere in the shadows. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting long, sharp-edged shadows across the concrete. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, the sound bouncing off the walls like a metronome counting down. From the darkness emerged a figure in a hooded jacket, face half hidden. Jasmine recognized the voice before she saw the eyes. "You got my message," the whistleblower said, not as a question, but as a statement. They didn't shake hands. Instead, he slipped a thick envelope from inside his jacket, holding it just long enough for her to feel the tension in his grip. She opened it enough to see what lay inside. Internal memos stamped confidential, strings of emails between Trump campaign operatives detailing targeted removal protocols for voter rolls, lists of districts, demographics, percentages, and next to every targeted zone, a chilling single word in bold: purge. "This isn't speculation," he said, voice low and raw. "This is the playbook, names, dates, orders. If you release this, you'll bring him down." His eyes darted to the empty ramp behind her, scanning for movement. "But they'll come for you." Jasmine kept her gaze locked on him, even as her mind raced through every possible outcome. Headlines, subpoenas, the inevitable smear campaign. The envelope was heavy now, like it contained not just paper, but the full gravity of what it meant to cross that line. "How many people know you have this?" she asked. "2," he replied. "And one of them isn't me anymore if I'm found here." A car door slammed somewhere above, the sound ricocheting down into the garage. He took a step back. "You have to move fast. Once they realize this didn't vanish with the court order, they'll burn every trail, and anyone standing on it." She wanted to ask why he trusted her, why he'd risked this. But she already knew. It wasn't about trust. It was about necessity. The whistleblower's footsteps retreated into the shadows, swallowed whole at the low hum of the garage. Jasmine stood there alone, envelope pressed to her chest, the cold seeping into her bones. Somewhere above her, the city carried on, unaware of the war already unfolding beneath its streets. She looked down at the sealed flap in her hands, her reflection warped in the glossy paper. It was more than evidence, it was a loaded weapon. And now it was pointed straight at her. By sunrise, the envelope was locked inside a fireproof case in her apartment. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing siren outside felt like a warning. She was nursing her second coffee when her phone lit up with a dozen notifications at once. At the top was a screenshot from an aide, circled in red. Truth Social, 6:12 a.m. The post was unmistakable, all caps, sharp-edged rage bleeding through every letter. Jasmine Crockett is dangerous and deranged, a liar who hates America and wants to destroy your vote. Within minutes, cable news had pounced. By the time she turned on the TV, the panels were already dissecting her name like carrion. One conservative pundit leaned forward, eyes glittering. This isn't just about political differences, this is about a radical congresswoman willing to burn the system down. Another voice, softer but just as cutting, questioned her motives. Is she exposing corruption, or is she just another fame seeker who can't resist the cameras? Her image filled the screen over and over, her words from the hearing clipped and looped, stripped of context, weaponized. On the liberal networks, the defense was tepid. Some called her brave but reckless, others muttered about political consequences and strategic timing. The message was clear. No one was going to save her if she fell. She muted the TV, but the noise followed her. Vibrating phone alerts, emails from reporters demanding comment, strangers filling her inbox with threats and slurs. The line between political disagreement and personal destruction had vanished overnight. For the first time in months, the edges of doubt pressed in. She paced her living room, the morning light cutting sharp across the floorboards. Was she walking into an unwinnable war? Could she carry this evidence all the way to the finish line before it destroyed her? The whistleblower's warning replayed in her head. They'll come for you. Now no longer a hypothetical, but a clock that had already started counting down. A knock at the door froze her mid-step. She moved quietly, checking the peephole. No one. Just a plain manila envelope lying on the doormat, her name typed neatly on the front. She picked it up slowly, her fingers brushing against the cool paper. Inside was a single printed photo, her leaving the parking garage last night, the whistleblower just steps away. No note, no signature, just proof that someone had been there, watching. She stared at the photo, her fingers tightening until the edges bent. For a second, her hand trembled, not from the cold, but from the sudden, sharp thought of how close they'd been without her knowing. The image felt invasive, like a hand pressed against her back in a dark room. She closed her eyes, drew one slow breath, and forced the tremor still. When she opened them again, the fear was folded away, replaced by something colder than fear. It was no longer a question of if the storm would hit. It was already here, and it had her name written in lightning. The only choice now was whether she would face it head-on, or be erased by it. The war council assembled in her apartment just after dusk. Marcus paced near the window, peeking through the blinds every few minutes like he expected headlights to stop outside. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to a half-written press release, while Tom Braddock leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the locked case holding the whistleblower's files. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and fear. "We drop it now," Marcus said, voice low but urgent. "Straight to the press, by morning, it's in every paper, every feed. They can't kill the story once it's everywhere." Claire didn't look up from her screen. "They'll question chain of custody, they'll say it's fabricated. And once that seed is planted, it doesn't matter if the documents are real, they'll drag her through a public trial while the real one disappears." Tom's tone was harder, more final. "The hearing is in 2 days, you want this to stick. You put it on record in front of the cameras, where it can't be edited, or they can't pretend they didn't hear it. If you leak it early, you hand them time to bury you before you even open your mouth." Jasmine sat silent through the barrage, her hands resting on the case like it was an anchor holding her to the floor. She'd heard every argument twice before, but now the noise outside, the protests, the news alerts, the hum of a country already sharpening its knives, made the choice feel heavier. She thought about the envelope on her counter, the photo of her and the whistleblower, proof that the other side already knew exactly what she had. Waiting meant risk, but rushing meant disaster. "Do you trust them to let you speak uninterrupted?" Claire finally asked, her voice soft but loaded. Jasmine looked up, meeting her eyes with something colder than defiance. "I don't need them to let me speak, I need them to try to stop me." She rose, pulling the case toward her, the metal latches clicking open with a sound that seemed to snap the room still. "We're not leaking a damn thing," she said. "We're going to walk into that hearing, look them in the eye, and hand the truth to the American people in real time." The room was silent for a moment, then Marcus swore under his breath, half in frustration, half in awe. Claire closed her laptop with a decisive thud. Tom gave the smallest nod. It wasn't agreement, it was acknowledgement. They were committed now, for better or worse. Hours later, backstage at the Capitol, Jasmine stood alone in the dim light, the murmur of the crowd beyond the door swelling like a tide. A camera lens blinked red just a few feet away, already lived to millions. She leaned in until her reflection filled the glass, her voice barely more than a breath but sharp enough to cut through the noise. America, when you see what I have, you'll know why they're so desperate to silence me. The hearing room felt smaller than it had any right to be. Every seat was filled, the air thick with the smell of perfume, coffee, and the faint ozone of overworked television lights. Rows of cameras framed the back wall like a firing squad, their lenses trained on the witness table. Millions of eyes waited beyond them, in living rooms, on phones, in break rooms, where people had stopped what they were doing to see if today would be the day something finally broke. Jasmine sat at the long mahogany table, her notes stacked neatly in front of her, the locked case at her feet. Across from her, Jim Jordan leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk. Not doubt, not even confidence, but the satisfaction of a man convinced he already knew the ending. The tip of his pen tapped in lazy rhythm, a metronome counting down to interruption. To Rose back, in the front row of the gallery, Trump's legal team sat like an unblinking wall. Dark suits, polished shoes, identical expressions, half boredom, half cold readiness. One of them adjusted his tie and whispered to the man beside him without taking his eyes off Jasmine. She felt the weight of their gaze, not as an abstract threat, but as something tangible, pressing against her ribs. The chair's gavel came down once, sharp and final. The committee will come to order. Jasmine rose, smoothing the front of her jacket, and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was steady, deliberate, the cadence measured to cut through the hum of live broadcast without rushing. For years, the American people have been told that our elections are the bedrock of our democracy. But a bedrock doesn't crumble overnight. It's chipped away, piece by piece, often in ways designed to look invisible. She let the sentence hang for a beat longer than necessary. The smirk on Jordan's face didn't fade, but his pen stopped tapping. In the last election cycle, we saw polling locations moved without notice, registration rolls altered in targeted districts, and identification requirements were rightened to exclude those least likely to be able to adapt. These are not administrative oversights. They are deliberate acts, and I have proof. A ripple moved through the room, the shuffle of papers, a cough cut short, the faint click of a camera zooming in. She didn't look at Jordan, though she could feel the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffened by a fraction. Instead, she let her gaze sweep the gallery, locking eyes for a split second with the people who had come to see if she would falter. Her fingers brushed the edge of the case under the table, feeling the cool metal, the locked weight of what it carried. Somewhere in the back of the room, a door clicked shut, sealing them in together. She drew a slow breath, the kind that steadies a marksman before the trigger pull. The next words would start a chain she couldn't stop, and she intended for the sound of it to echo far beyond these walls. Jasmine let the silence stretch until it began to itch in the room, until even the photographers hesitated, fingers hovering over their shutters. Then she reached down, unlatched the steel case with two deliberate clicks, the sound carrying unnaturally loud in the expectant air. She drew out a thick, weathered folder, its edges curled and corners creased, not the crispness of something staged, but the wear of hands that had carried it in fear. Her thumb traced the red confidential stamp before she held it up just high enough for the cameras to catch. The first page slid free, fluttering slightly as if reluctant to face the light. Black and white printouts of internal memos, the letterheads of Trump's campaign operatives glaring from the top of each one. Beneath them, in cold bureaucratic type, were lists of targeted voting districts, majority Black and Latino communities marked with the word purge in bold. No interpretations, no ambiguity, just the plain, ugly mechanics of erasing voices. The sound hit the room like a physical thing, a collective gasp, the scuff of a chair leg, someone in the gallery whispering "Oh my God" under their breath. Jordan was already leaning forward, his voice cracking through the tension. Point of order. She's out of order. This material is not cleared for public disclosure. The committee chair opened his mouth, but Jasmine didn't wait for permission. Out of order. She shot back, the folder still raised in her hand. No, sir. This whole damn system is out of order, and you let criminals write the maps. Her voice didn't waver. It cut across the table like steel on stone. Jordan's face flushed, his pen tapping in a staccato that betrayed the strain under his practiced control. In the front row, one of Trump's lawyers leaned forward, his lips pressed into a thin line, whispering something to the man beside him. They both glanced toward the door, a signal too quick for most to catch, but Jasmine did. Somewhere in that look, she could feel the shift from debate to damage control. The gallery had dissolved into no's, some clapping, others shouting over the din, reporters firing off questions no one could answer fast enough. The gavel slammed repeatedly, but the chaos was a living thing now, and no one could cage it back inside the rules. Jasmine set the folder on the table in front of her, sliding the top page forward just enough for the cameras to capture every damning line. She didn't look at Jordan. She didn't have to. His silence in that moment was louder than any objection he could raise, and as she sat back, letting the storm rage around her, she knew this wasn't the peak. It was only the first crack in a dam that was about to give way. What she was about to say next wouldn't just bruise reputations, it would detonate them. Jordan's chair scraped back so hard it screeched against the marble floor, cutting through the nose like a blade. He shot to his feet, knuckles slamming into the polished wood table hard enough to make the microphones tremble. "This is outrageous," he barked, voice pitching upward into raw anger. "You don't get to walk in here with stolen documents and smear the entire Republican Party with your conspiracy theories." Spittle caught the light as he jabbed a finger toward her, his face flushed deep red. The chairman's gavel came down once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. "Order. The committee will come to order." But Jordan wasn't done. He leaned forward across the table, his voice low enough for the mix to barely catch but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You've crossed a line, Crockett, and you're going to regret it." The room erupted again, not in polite murmurs, but in a cacophony of shouts, clapping, boos. The hiss of whispers passed between reporters like contraband. Somewhere in the chaos, the hashtags were already igniting. Hashtag Crockett vs. Jordan. Hashtag Trump tapes. Hashtag out of order or out of time. Phone screens lit up across the gallery as tweets, live streams, and video clips surged into the digital bloodstream, spreading faster than any gavel could suppress. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She sat back in her chair, eyes fixed on Jordan like a surgeon assessing the exact point to cut. "You want to talk about stolen," she said, tone smooth but edged with steel. "Let's talk about the millions of votes stolen before they were ever cast. Let's talk about the maps drawn to erase entire neighborhoods from the political map. And let's talk about how you've spent your career defending it, dressing it up as law and order when it's nothing but power dressed in chains." Jordan slammed his fist again, the sound muffled this time by the stack of papers under his hand, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed that this wasn't theater anymore. This was a man cornered, and cornered men lash out. One of Trump's lawyers shifted in his seat, signaling to a staffer who slipped quietly out the side door, as if retreating to activate a contingency plan. The chairman was still calling for order, his gavel now little more than background percussion to the riot of noise in the room. Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her gaze sweeping the committee, the gallery, and the cameras beyond them. "This isn't just about votes," she said, her voice dropping into a register that forced the room to lean in. "It's about whose America we're going to live in. One where the powerful get to choose the people, or one where the people finally choose the powerful. And today, every person watching gets to decide which side of that line they're on." By the time Jasmine's head hit the pillow, the battle was already being rewritten. She woke before dawn to the glow of her phone, a cascade of alerts buzzing like a swarm. The first video autoplayed before she could stop it, her face frozen mid-sentence, lips parted, eyes intense, looped over and over under a black banner. "Unhinged Crockett loses IT on the Hill." The voiceover was slow and deliberate, dripping with condescension. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, dangerous, divisive, and determined to tear America apart. On Fox News, the chyron blared in red. Crockett meltdown on the Hill. A panel of smirking hosts dissected her every word, stripping away context like meat from bone. "You could see it," one said, leaning into the camera. "She's unglued. That's not leadership. That's a temper tantrum in heels." Another chimed in, "She's not defending democracy. She's auditioning for late-night comedy." By mid-morning, Attack ads were flooding the airwaves and social media. Grainy, slowed-down footage of her slamming the documents onto the table play under ominous music, her words cut and rearranged to make her sound manic. A deep, gravelly narrator warned, "If Jasmine Crockett will scream in Congress, what will she do to your community?" Clips from years-old speeches were dredged up, edited to strip away nuance, repackaged as proof she was anti-American. Even in the privacy of her apartment, the smear felt invasive, like they'd crawled into her lungs and stolen the breath from her. Every channel, every feed, every notification was a mirror reflecting the version of her they wanted the world to see. Unstable. Dangerous. A punchline. She muted the TV but couldn't shut out the hum of it bleeding through the walls, the voices of neighbors who'd already seen the headlines. Her team's group chat was chaos. Marcus sent screenshots of trending hashtags designed to discredit her. Claire fired off legal concerns about defamation, knowing the damage was already being done. Tom's single message was blunt: "They're coming at you like they think you're winning." Jasmine stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop. The woman looking back at her wasn't rattled, she was sharpened. The attacks didn't scare her, they confirmed she'd hit something vital. But there was something else too. Just under the surface, the knowledge that these smears weren't just aimed at her reputation. They were meant to isolate her, to make allies flinch before standing beside her. She closed the laptop with a quiet click, the sound cutting clean through the static in her head. If they wanted a villain, she'd give them one. But not the one they'd scripted. She'd give them the kind they couldn't control, the kind that didn't break under the weight of a chyron. And the next time they saw her on camera, it wouldn't be in a 30-second hit piece. It would be live, unedited, and impossible to spin. If the smear campaign was designed to isolate her, it failed spectacularly. Within 48 hours, the streets began to answer back. From Dallas to Philadelphia, from the cold wind of Chicago to the sunlit corners of Phoenix, crowds formed without waiting for permission. Retirees in folding chairs waved homemade placards. Veterans in worn leather jackets held their medals high. Teachers stood shoulder to shoulder with union workers, their signs painted in thick black letters, "Stand with Jasmine." In Detroit, the rally took over an entire downtown square. The winter air bit at exposed hands and flushed cheeks, but no one moved. People had traveled hours, some days, to be here. The sound system crackled as chants rolled through the crowd, rhythmic, defiant, echoing off the glass towers that loomed overhead. News cameras panned the sea of faces, but it wasn't the media that held them together. It was the idea that they were no longer waiting for someone else to defend them. When Jasmine stepped onto the small wooden stage, the noise swelled to a roar. She scanned the crowd, seeing not strangers, but stories. The factory worker who'd emailed her after losing his polling place, the grandmother who'd hugged her outside a hearing, the teenager who'd volunteered at her campaign office after school. She raised the mic slowly, letting the anticipation hang for a beat before she spoke. "They can smear my name," she began, her voice carrying over the cold air, "but they can't silence my people." The cheer that followed wasn't just loud. It was raw, a collective exhale from thousands who'd been holding their breath through years of political chokeholds. She went on, each sentence sharper than the last, her cadence tightening like a drumline. "They want you to believe your vote is disposable. They want you to think you're too small to matter. That if that were true, they wouldn't be working so hard to erase you." The crowd erupted again, fists in the air, the sound rattling the stage under her feet. Behind her, a banner rippled in the wind. "Your voice, your vote, your fight." She could see reporters scribbling in their notebooks, cameras zooming in, phones raised high to live stream every word. She stepped closer to the edge of the platform, leaning into the moment. "This fight isn't about left or right," she said, her tone lowering, deliberate. "It's about the people who think this country belongs to them alone, and the rest of us who know better." The square went silent for half a breath before another chant began, low and strong, building into something seismic. She let it roll, her eyes scanning the horizon as if already searching for the next battleground. Because she knew this wasn't the peak, the real test was still coming, and it would make this crowd look small. The adrenaline from the Detroit rally carried her through the flight home, but it evaporated the moment she stepped into the quiet of her apartment. The city outside was muffled under a low blanket of winter fog, but inside, the silence had weight, the kind that made you notice every sound. The first call came at 12:14 a.m., a block number. A pause on the line before a voice she didn't recognize whispered, "You're not safe here." Then a click. An hour later, another call. This time, breathing, slow, steady, deliberate. She hung up, but the rhythm lingered in her ears. She sat by the window, the phone on the table, watching headlights slide across the street below. At 2:37 a.m., a black sedan pulled up across from her building. The engine stayed on, exhaust curling in the cold air, the glow of a cigarette ember flaring behind the windshield. It didn't move for 40 minutes. By dawn, her exhaustion had sharpened into something raw. Every shadow looked heavier, every footstep in the hallway louder. She knew enough about political retaliation to recognize this wasn't about scaring her into leaving politics. This was about breaking her rhythm, shaking her until her own mind became the enemy. She leaned back in the kitchen chair, fingers gripping her coffee mug, until the heat bled away. Marcus called mid-morning, his voice tight. "You're being watched, Jasmine. These aren't crank calls. You need to think about security." She looked out the window again. The sedan was gone, but a different car sat 2 spaces down. Unfamiliar. Claire texted a list of protective measures, the words restraining order and private security glowing on her screen like cold solutions to a problem that had already crossed a line. For the first time in days, the fatigue pressed harder than the fight. She closed her eyes, let her head rest against the chair back, and felt the weight of it all. The hearings, the smears, the rallies, the files in her possession that could change the course of a presidency. The line between courage and self-destruction was so thin, she could feel it under her feet. But under the fear was something heavier, something that anchored her when every instinct told her to retreat. She thought of Sergeant Boone in Georgia, of the teacher in Detroit, of the people in the crowd chanting her name not because she was untouchable, but because she wasn't. They knew the cost, and still, they came. She set the coffee down and stood, the stiffness in her legs replaced by a steadier weight in her chest. Her reflection in the window was pale, tired, but unbroken. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but each word landed like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples outward. "If I back down now, they don't just win today, they win forever." The capital had never felt more like a fortress. Streets were sealed off to blocks out, snipers on the rooftops, and metal detectors lined the marble steps like the teeth of a trap. The air was crisp but heavy with the static hum of anticipation, the kind that made every passing siren feel closer than it was. Every network was live, their anchors perched at temporary desks outside, earpieces in, faces taut with the awareness that something irreversible could happen inside those walls today. Inside, the security presence was suffocating. Uniformed officers flanked every hallway, their hands hovering just inches from their holsters, eyes scanning every face twice. Staffers moved quickly in hushed conversations, gripping folders as if paper alone could shield them from the weight of the day. The hearing room's double door stood shut, guarded by 2 stone-faced sergeants at arms. Behind them, the chamber was already filling, the gallery packed with journalists, activists, political operatives, and the select few civilians lucky or connected enough to get seats. Then, the shift, heads turned toward the far end of the corridor as Jasmine Crockett appeared, walking with measured steps that cut clean through the nose. The bold red suit blazed under the sterile light, not crimson for vanity, but the deep, deliberate red of warning, of defiance, of a woman who decided she wasn't here to blend in. It was a color that said she'd come to draw blood, metaphorically or otherwise. Her eyes didn't flick toward the cameras, though she knew they were there, their lenses drinking in every inch of her expression for the slightest crack. The steel case was in her left hand, her grip loose but uncheckable. As she passed through the security checkpoint, the machine beeped once. The officers stepped forward, then stopped when they saw who it was. She gave no reaction, simply moved on, her heels striking the tile in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind the double doors, she could hear the muted roar of the room, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of low voices, the hiss of camera shutters, prepped for the first shot. Somewhere inside, Jordan was already waiting, cold like a predator behind a desk. Somewhere in the front row, Trump's legal team sat with their binders and rehearsed objections. She stopped just short of the threshold, taking one breath deep, enough to steady the pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't just an entrance, it was a declaration of intent. And when she stepped inside, Every person in that room, ally or enemy, would know she hadn't come to survive the day, she'd come to change it. The instant she sat down, the barrage began. Jordan leaned into his mic, the smirk already loaded. "Congresswoman, are you here to provide testimony or to audition for prime time? Because the American people deserve substance, not theatrics." His allies around the dais chuckled, waiting for her to stumble. Jasmine's eyes locked on him, unblinking. "Substance is exactly what I'm here with, Congressman. But I understand why facts might feel like theatrics to those who've spent years avoiding them." She slid a sheet of data forward, the columns sharp and unforgiving. "This is a record of polling place closures in predominantly minority districts over the last 4 years. Your name, sir, is on the legislation that alloweth." A younger GOP member jumped in, his voice quick and dismissive. "Correlation doesn't equal causation, Congresswoman." Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "Tell that to the 72-year-old in Texas who walked 5 miles in the rain because his polling location vanished without notice, and then was told his ID no longer qualify. Tell him it's just a coincidence." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Another Republican, older and slower, tried a different tack. "Isn't it true you've taken money from activist groups who benefit from these so-called investigations?" She leaned forward, voice calm but edged. "Isn't it true you've taken donations from PACs tied to the very firms that draw these maps?" The man froze, shifting in his seat, the retort dying before it reached his lips. Jordan slammed his palm on the table. "This is political theater." Jasmine's reply was immediate, her tone like the crack of a whip. "Theater has scripts and actors. What I'm talking about are real people whose voices you've tried to erase. And the only performance here is the one you've been giving to protect those who profit from it." Every exchange was a cut, every rebuttal a deliberate slice through the veneer of their control. She didn't shout, she didn't rush. She told stories, of veterans, of teachers, of mothers, each one tethered to hard numbers they couldn't wave away. The more they tried to corner her, the more the room leaned toward her side of the table. By the time the chairman tried to regain control, she wasn't looking at him, or even at Jordan anymore. She was looking past the committee, into the camera lens beaming her words into millions of homes. And when she spoke, it was no longer an answer, it was a warning. "If your power depends on silence, then I promise you, it's already slipping away." The room was still vibrating from her last line when Jasmine reached down and unlocked the steel case at her feet. No words, no preamble, just the deliberate lift of a black USB drive into the light. She slid it across to the committee clerk, her eyes never leaving Jordan's. "Play it," she said, the command low but carrying enough weight to cut through the air. The monitors along the walls flickered to life. A grainy time-stamped video filled the screens, a closed-door meeting, the camera angle just high enough to capture the long conference table. Around it sat senior Trump campaign officials, their voices clear, their tone casual. "Target the districts with the weakest turnout," one said. "If they're mostly black or Latino, the math works in our favor." Another laughed, tapping a map with a pen. "Purge the rolls before they even get to the polls. It's cleaner that way." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps burst from the gallery. Someone shouted shame. From the back before being hushed, even the camera shutters hesitated for a beat, as if stunned. On the far end of the table, Jordan had gone utterly still, his pen frozen mid-tap. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Jasmine let the footage roll for another 30 seconds, each casual exchange another nail driven deep. When she finally gestured for it to stop, the silence was thick enough to hear the faint whir of the monitors cooling. She leaned forward into the mic, voice precise, each word landing like a strike. "That's not rumor, that's not spin. That's the architecture of a theft, design, approved, and executed under the campaign you've been defending." Jordan shifted back in his chair, his smirk gone, replaced by something colder, heavier. The man who had interrupted her at every opportunity now sat with his hands flat on the table, eyes locked on the wood grain as if it might give him a way out. The chairman's gavel came down, a sharp crack that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The cameras caught it all, the documents, the footage, the room holding its breath. And then, as the gavel struck again, the lens found Jordan's face in tight close-up. No words, no movement, just the image of a man who, for the first time that day, Looked like he'd heard the sound of something breaking. By nightfall, the country was watching itself in the mirror. Every major network ran split-screen coverage. On one side, the grainy footage Jasmine had unveiled. The voices of Trump's campaign officials laid bare. On the other, live panels of commentators, each interpreting the same truth through their own lens. On progressive channels, the mood was electric. "This is the most damning piece of evidence we've seen in decades," one analyst said, leaning forward as if pulled toward the camera. Another called it the modern-day Watergate. Only this time, the perpetrators were arrogant enough to say the quiet part out loud. Viewers sent in messages of support, the ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolling so fast it blurred. On conservative outlets, the outrage was a storm. The footage was selectively edited, taken out of context, a partisan hit job orchestrated by a radical leftist congresswoman with a vendetta. One host jabbed a finger at the camera. "This isn't about voter rolls, this is about destroying the man who made America great." In the lower third, the chyron read, "Crockett's smear, will she face consequences?" Social media burned hotter than the broadcast airwaves. Hashtags from both sides fought for dominance. Hashtag Crockett Truth trended alongside hashtag Fraudulent Files. Millions of views poured into clips of her line to Jordan, "This whole damn system is out of order," set to music, edited into TikToks, remixed into rallying cries and attack ads alike. The data was harder to spin. By the end of the week, polling agencies reported a surge in voter registration across multiple states, with the highest spikes in predominantly Black and Latino communities. In Georgia alone, numbers jumped by 14% in 48 hours. Local organizers credited the hearing. "People saw themselves in what she said," one volunteer told a reporter. They saw the stakes. In Washington, the atmosphere was volatile. Some lawmakers distanced themselves from Jordan's defense, while others doubled down, calling for investigations into how Jasmine had obtained the evidence. Her office phone line jammed with both praise and threats, the calls blurring together into a single, relentless nose. In living rooms and coffee shops, the conversation had shifted. It wasn't just about whether the documents were real. It was about what kind of country allowed them to exist in the first place. And in that shift, something dangerous for her opponents had taken root. People were asking questions they hadn't dared ask before. For the first time in a long time, the balance of the fight didn't feel fixed. It felt like it could break, and Jasmine knew that if it did, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be the kind of break the whole country heard. To drive to rural Georgia took her off the interstate and onto two-lane roads lined with bare winter trees, their branches clawing at the gray sky. Jasmine had made this trip before, back when she was still building her case, but this time the air felt different, heavier, charged with the echoes of everything that had happened since. In the passenger seat sat a worn portable DVD player, the hearing footage queued and ready. Sergeant Harold Boone's modest house sat at the end of a gravel drive, its porch light glowing against the early evening gloom. He opened the door before she knocked, leaning on a cane but standing tall in his pressed shirt, medals pinned in perfect alignment. "Congresswoman," he said with a half-smile, "I was wondering when you'd come back." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Family photos lined the shelves, Boone in uniform, Boone with his late wife, Boone holding a fishing rod over a sunlit lake. They settled into the couch, the DVD player bounced on the coffee table. Jasmine hit play, and the room filled with the sharp crack of the chairman's gavel, the hum of the hearing room, and her own voice spilling from tinny speakers. She didn't watch the screen. She watched him. His eyes followed every moment, narrowing when Jordan interrupted, widening when she lifted the folder, flickering with something deeper, and the footage of the campaign officials began to play. By the time the gavel fell at the end, his hands were clenched on his knees. For a long moment, there was no sound except the soft whir of the player. Then Boone turned to her, his voice low but steady. "You gave me my voice back." The words hit her harder than any headline, any applause, any trending hashtag. In that instant, every late night, every threat, every smear campaign felt worth it. She exhaled, a tension she hadn't realized she was holding slipping from her shoulders. "Sergeant, it was always your voice. I just made sure they heard it." He chuckled. But there was a catch in it, the kind that comes when pride tangles with gratitude. Outside, the night deepened, the porch light spilling a small circle onto the gravel drive. She stood to leave, and he followed her to the door. Be careful, he said, gripping her hand. They'll come at you harder now. She met his gaze, and there was no bravado in her answer, only truth. They already are, she said, but I'm not here to make it easy for them. As she walked back to her car, she glanced once at the small, warm glow of his home against the dark. She knew the fight wasn't over. But she also knew this: as long as people like Boone were watching, the other side would never have the last word. The studio lights were hot, but the air was still. No audience this time, no opposing counsel, no clatter of papers or gavel to break the moment, just the quiet hum of the camera and the blinking red light that meant every word was going straight into living rooms across the country. Jasmine sat forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped loosely, her eyes locked on the lens as if she could look straight through it into the heart of whoever was watching. Her voice started low, steady. You've heard me say a lot these past weeks. You've seen the documents, the footage, the truth they didn't want you to know. And now, I need you to understand something they hope you'll forget. Democracy doesn't protect itself. She let the words hang, the silence pulling the viewer in closer. It needs you, she continued, her tone tightening. Not someday. Not when it's convenient. Now, it needs you to register, to vote, to speak up when they tell you to sit down. It needs you to stand beside the people whose voices they try to erase, because if you don't, one day it will be your voice they come for. Her hands unfolded, palms open in a gesture that was part plea, part challenge. They'll tell you your voice is too small to matter. They'll tell you the fight is already lost. They're wrong. Every time you show up, every time you make yourself heard, you prove them wrong. And I'm asking you, never, ever let them take your voice. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just held the gaze, unblinking, until the director in the booth let the silence stretch one beat longer than usual. Then the screen faded to black. In stark white letters, the words appeared. The fight continues. And somewhere, watching in the dark, people who had never planned to act before felt something shift. They knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their part in the story. Jasmine Crockett's stand was more than a political battle. It was proof that one voice, anchored in truth, can challenge an entire machine. She showed us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to rise in spite of it, knowing the cost. In our own lives, we face moments where injustice whispers stay quiet. That is when we must speak the loudest. Change has never come from silence. It has always come from those willing to risk for what is right. When history looks back, will it find you on the sidelines or in the fight? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.